everybody. Welcome to InPsightRadio. I am your host, Danielle Egnew, and you are a fly on the wall too everywhere. I hope you are really enjoying spring. I hope you're getting outside and getting some sunshine and getting some fresh air. There are parts of the country that are opening up. There are parts of the country that are exploding with COVID. So continue to be safe. Just make sure that you're somewhere where you can enjoy some good sun. Because I'm noticing that people are needing some of this sunshine. We're needing to help people out during these times. So get out there and help yourself. You got this. And, I'm really enjoying the emails that you are sending me regarding different topics that we've had on the podcast. Now, if you have ideas for podcasts, go ahead and post them as we go down in the comment section on the different podcast topics, because it's fun, and if I get enough of those recommendations for a particular topic, then I'll go in and we can bump a podcast for another podcast that folks are really interested in hearing. And as spring comes in, I'm really attempting to utilize my time here well with these podcasts. We've got a lot of Road Angel production coming up, and there's a lot going on in my world. So I'm really trying to utilize these podcast times to answer as many questions as I can for everybody. And yes, I am still doing private readings. By the way, I've been getting a lot of email on this lately. I am still doing private readings. I'm just doing them over the phone, so we can go ahead and work those in between my production schedule. So if you want those readings, go ahead and sign up at my website at danielleegnew-advisor.com. And it's /schedule-a-reading, because that's how inventive we are. That's right. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. I've been receiving so many people writing and, texting and emailing saying, geez, are you still doing readings? I know you got the TV show, but yes, I am. So there you go. And I am going to apologize in advance for my raspy, weird-sounding voice today. There's a lot of things blooming in Montana right now, so you're getting the very beginning of my hay fever voice. So there you go. We can all spring forward together. So today's topic is something that I received a lot of different emails from, and it was after one of the other podcasts recently. And this podcast today is about this subject. And the subject is, do bad people go to hell? Now, you've heard me talk about the idea of hell and what hell is. And, this podcast, now that we're in May of 2021, this podcast has been on the air or on the interwebs for over 3 years. And I touch on the idea of hell over and over again because we just can't seem to let go of this idea that bad people need to suffer somewhere. We've got this punitive idea of spiritual growth. And honestly, it kind of freaks me out because I say this frequently, but I'll say it again. If God is as petty as our human-made franchised religions have made God out to be, then we are all effed on this planet. I'm sorry. I mean, literally, if God really did create a race of beings that God thought was a bunch of maggot sinners coming out the gate, and if we really are just the sole product of, like, God sneezed slightly wrong and we came out imperfect and now it all sucks and half of us are going to get to heaven and most of us are going to go to hell, then, why try? Really, that's ridiculous. Now, it's not been my experience, not that I'm speaking for God, thank you very much. There's so many people online that are calling themselves prophets. And hey, if that title works for them, that is awesome. I have had other people call me that. I do not identify as a prophet. I think we are all prophets. I think we are all stepping up to places of enlightenment where we can come into some really incredible, powerful means of being who we are. However, I wouldn't say that we are, I wouldn't call myself a prophet of God. That being said, it's not been my experience that when people die, if they've had a hard life, they get disqualified by the middle management checklist and they go downstairs to hell. Now, this can really make some folks upset, especially people who have, quote, done all the right things in their life, end quote, and they're pretty sure what they're going to get is something special in heaven that all the mean people who cut corners aren't going to get. And again, not that I've been to heaven recently. However, that's not really what I've seen. That's not really how it plays out. And I mean, even the idea of hell in the Bible, nowhere in the Bible does it say you're going to be, cast into hell for making mistakes. There is an allusion to a pit of fire in the New Testament book of Revelations in the Christian religion, in the Christian Bible, that talks about the end times and blah, 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 the Antichrist, blah, there's a big fight. And God comes down and throws the beast into this pit of fire. And the beast is chained there for 1,000 years. Then it gets to come out, wreak hell again. And then it finally gets its butt kicked and it's a paradise on earth indefinitely. And I was like, what is 1,000 years for? What is that about? Anyway, I don't know, whatever. It was John's mushroom trip in a cave in the Middle East. And then he wrote the book of Revelations and somebody found it and translated it, and there it is. So what I would tell you is we have this idea of hell. And for me, this idea of hell doesn't really hold up very well, because a lot of people talk about Jesus says you're going to go to hell or God's going to send you to hell. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on the biblical history of hell because I've spent so much time on that on other podcasts. But the super duper cliff notes are basically that there have been mentions in the Old Testament of a place and then in New Testament where people passed by and Jesus made like a geographical place, a real place on the earth, not under the crust of the earth where the devil lives. And Jesus made a statement about behavior. And if you don't clean up your behavior, you might as well be living in this hell or this place. Well, Jesus didn't say hell. Jesus meant this geographical place that was literally a dump. It was a dump in the Middle East, and people would burn bodies there. They would dump dead animals there. They would dump trash there, and it stunk, and it was disgusting, and it was constantly on fire. And Jesus was referencing this actual place of grotesqueness when Jesus said, hey, if you live a gross lifestyle, it's going to feel like you're living in this hellish place. And it wasn't even called hell. It wasn't even called that. But it translated to the Valley of Fire. And so that's a super loose history of why we've got the word hell in there. But somewhere along the Catholic kings and all of the kings translating what was the High Greek into, oh my God, that's the New Testament, was the High Greek into English, then of course that got hijacked and it got manipulated according to whatever king's politics were there. And, it didn't take kings very long to realize that human beings may not be afraid of humans. And if the quality of your life is crap, if you are a serf in 1300s England and you're starving and you have pustulous sores all over your body, and it's not like you can go to college and increase your earning potential and make your future better. I mean, it wasn't that at all. It was more about, hey, guess what? You were born into poverty. You're probably going to die by the time you're 20 of a pustulous sore in an inappropriate place. So the only way that kings could instill fear or give people hope was to talk about an afterlife. Because really, I mean, they weren't going to uplift the people they were oppressing. That's not going to work. So the funny thing about unhappy people is they have nothing to live for. And unhappy people, if you take a lot away from them, eventually go crazy and then rage against the machine. And, we can look at the very fringe faction of the Muslim religion. And I say very fringe because there are 72 different sects, sects, sects of the Muslim religion. And it's just really one or two on the way edge out there that believe that if you bomb somebody, you're going to get all these virgins in the afterlife. That's a promise made to somebody who has a crappy life. And, you think about Christianity. Well, I'm sorry that you've got pustulous sores, 1300 serf, but I'll tell you, when you die, you're going to inherit the riches of heaven. And by the way, because I'm your king and you're supposed to submit to me, and I can't help but notice that you're not. So, I mean, what do you got to lose anyway, right? You got pustulous sores in places we can't really talk about. Your whole family is dead from a weird disease. But I'll tell you what, there's this place called the afterlife. It's in heaven. And this is pretty much a living hell, right? And I know, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you weren't born to be me because I'm amazing, right? I'm your king. However, I would like to point out at this point in time that if you're really just a good person and you give me everything that's yours and then you die, then you're going to be able to go to heaven. And good people go to heaven and people who rise up against their king go to hell. Now, as your king, I have to tell you, if you think that pustulous sore under your armpits and in places that, again, I can't really mention, is horrible, and you think, coughing up your own blood 16 times a day is uncomfortable, and you think losing your tooth when you're chewing on bread is bad, wait till you get to hell. Let me tell you all about hell. Hell makes this existence look like a party. This makes it look like you are on the J-Lo tour of fabulous. So you're going to want, just don't make sure you don't go to hell, okay? And the way you don't go to hell is you be a good person and you give me everything, because I'm your king, right? It says so in the Bible that I oversaw the committee on who rewrote all the Bible. And then we're square, right? We're good. So screw this lifetime, but the afterlife is going to rock for you. And so, honestly, gang, that's pretty much how it went historically with the Christian Bible and the idea of hell. And if you notice that people aren't offering to kill themselves for religion when they have happy lives. They're not really as apt to think of the idea of hell, because if you're having a good life, if you have a good family, if you are aware that God or the Spirit is love and is in life and is working for you, and that Spirit is not your adversary, not your judge, yet Spirit is your advocate, God is your advocate, okay? If we're to talk spiritual physics here, I'm a creature of light, you're a creature of light. The spiritual particle of love is the predominant particle in all of God and all of this creation and all of nature and all of the quantum field and all of the spiritual universe, even if you don't believe in a God consciousness. That particle of love holds the whole thing together, okay? So where would hell be in all of that? It doesn't make any sense. So I've had a lot of people write to me over the years and say, well, but what happens to people who are really bad and, child rapers and serial abusers and psychos that kill people? Surely they go to hell. Because I can't believe that God or the universe would reward someone with a lovely afterlife when they've done all these bad things in life. Let's talk about the reward myth, shall we? Reward someone. Reward. Are we a 9? Are we 5? Are we 3 years old? Human beings. I'm going to get a good life and I want my reward when I die. Honestly, gang, that just sounds so creepy, right? That sounds really 1950s creepy. Our reward for being good people is a good life, is a grown spirit, is edifying our communities, is growing as a human being. Our reward for being a good person is understanding that universe, that universal consciousness, the love particle, the quantum particle, God exists within us and within our everyday lives, that we are not these separate maggots under the heel of perfection that will never be what God wants us to be, yet that we are an expression of that love consciousness. That's our reward, okay? And when we die, when our bodies wear out, we go to the next incarnation of life. And so, okay, let's take somebody who's the child raper. Let's take somebody who's a quote, terrible human being. And I'm saying terrible human being with finger quotes because one person's terrible human being is another person's hero. Look at the last president of the United States from 2016 to 2020. To some people, that person was the most incredible patriotic hero they've ever seen. That person moved them to tears. It moved them to storm a Capitol building on January 6th. To other people, that person was so disturbing that they were the devil, that they brought so much hatred forward they couldn't even begin to think why somebody would place this person on a platform. So remember, one person's hero is another person's devil. Welcome to Earth. So if we're looking at the portion of hell that says if you want a reward, you go to heaven. If you want a punishment, you go to hell. We create hell on this plane of existence. We create hell in our head. And that makes people who want to see people suffer forever in the afterlife really angry when they hear me say this, because they want their child molester brother or uncle or dad to go and crisp in the fires of hell for eternity and feel the pain that they felt. being victimized as a child. They want to know that that person feels persecution forever for what they felt because they're hurting. And it's not been my observation that when a broken person who perhaps was raped by their uncle or their father or whoever, when that gentleman goes forward and becomes an abuser and they never received any help from it, it's not my observation in spiritual physics or in what I can see of the afterlife. I can't see into heaven. I can see little glimpses through people who come back to tell me about things, or they'll give me a little window of what their heaven looks like if I'm speaking as an intercessor for that person who's on the other side. Yet, I have yet to see a God, and we're just going to say God, gang. So if you don't believe in God, just hang in there with me. Otherwise, we're going to be here for a million years with me renaming God every time I want to say universal source. So I'm going to say God. So if folks think that this pissy, angry God is sitting upstairs and here's this male who was sexually abused by a male in his family, who was sexually abused by a male in his family, who was sexually abused by a male in his family, and this goes all the way back to the time immortal. It is not by my experience that this universal love particle, this God, looks at this person who was broken at the ages of 4, between the ages of 4 and 7 years old, and turned into a sociopath and a narcissist and a nutball. That God doesn't look at that person and says, "Well, I'm sorry. Luck just dealt you a bad hand there, son. Looks like you're going to go straight to hell. Now you're just trash and garbage. Just getting rid of you. Surplus population." That Scrooge had something going on there with that quote, I'll tell you. That's not been my experience. My experience is that the heavens open up and God, or this particle, or this love, looks at this person who has kept themselves in a hell for their whole life because they are operating under such shame from being raped as a child and such shame for this perversion in their mind that they've got going on, that they've lived in hell for their entire life. And yes, there are some people who are so broken that they just get off ruining people. That's true. But most people aren't those people. Most people, when I look inside the most, what we may societally consider the most decrepit minds, the most disturbed minds, once in a while, I'll get climbing around in there and I'll realize that somebody's maybe got a dark passenger with them. They're not possessed by the devil, but maybe they've got a good dark buddy on the other side pulling for them, and they're so broken that they're just literally out of their mind crazy, and they no longer align with anything that is light. But that person is barely in their body at that point. That person is stepped out with a mental illness and is sick, okay? And gets tormented by horrible dreams and tormented by dark, terrifying things that approach them in the middle of the night. People who are serial abusers experience an extreme amount of torment on a regular basis that they just don't talk about because that part of them is shut away. And they've also got a little person in them that was abused that is locked in their basement screaming 24/7 for attention. So I'm not suggesting that, all the folks who have been abused need to feel sorry for their abusers. I'm simply saying that things aren't always what they look like. So when people want someone to suffer, they want them to go to hell, they want them to feel the fires of hell and feel the anguish and feel the pain and all these things. They're often doing that in real life. The abusers themselves are often experiencing that personal hell in real life. And it's quiet and it's shame-based and it's awful. And again, I'm not saying they shouldn't be brought to justice. I'm not saying I'm making excuses for them. I'm saying when I get a chance to look into the life paths and the hearts and the psyches of people who are serial abusers, there's a lot more going on there than you may think that is negative for that person. So the idea of hell, what happens to bad people? Well, oftentimes bad people, they're not born bad. I say this all the time. Have you ever seen an evil baby? Besides Rosemary's Baby, which is a ridiculous movie from the 70s. Have you ever seen an evil baby? Have you ever looked in the eyes of a baby and been like, "Oh, that's one evil mofo, that thing. Damn, put it away before it grows teeth and bites your face off." Yeah, try no. Okay? So we come from the other side. We come from light. We come from this God source. and our little baby spirit hits a body. And we're just babies, and we cry, and we poo our pants, and we peep, and we laugh, and we giggle, and we try a lemon head for the first time and about die because our optic nerves feel like they're shriveling and our head caves in, and we're crying and crying. We get formed by our life here. So hell is oftentimes what we do to ourselves and we do to other people, and we must live with the repercussions of the grotesque behavior that we enact here on earth. Now, to completely confuse the situation, yes, there is a dimension that is dark and chaotic. Yes, there is a dimension in which beings that we call demonic life or demons exist. And yes, it's chaotically terrible. And yes, it's like a freak show version of American Horror Story, had a baby with phantasm and then had an affair with Jacob's ladder. I mean, it's twisted up. Hell, that dimension that we would call hell, that place of complete and utter opposite from light. It is the absence of all light. It is the absence of all compassion. It is the absence of all love. It is the spiritual antithesis on the other tipping point scale dimension of light. It's a vacuum of nasty, okay? Is there a dimension that exists like that? Well, yes, there is. And that's actually the best of those dimensions. There's ones that go below that get grosser and grosser. And do we go there? Well, here's where this gets rough, because there's a reason. Okay, let me back this up. I got this angel helping me describe this. So I want you to think about a rainbow, okay? Red, orange, yellow, blue, indigo, violet. All of those colors in a rainbow. They're separated by bandwidths, basically. And they're separated in the color spectrum. Light travels at different speeds, right? And colors are broken up into different spectrums because they're being broken apart because of different speeds that the light is traveling. So red, orange, yellow, blue, indigo, violet. Okay, so we're going to put red as the hell dimension, which is on one side of the rainbow, and we're going to put violet on the other. We're going to put that in the heaven dimension on the other side of the rainbow. So you have all these colors in between, separating them. So why is the chaos dimension way the hell to the left and the heaven dimension way the hell to the right in our particular example here? Well, the reason being is that if the hell dimension gets too close to the heaven dimension or the light dimension is going to swallow it up. Light swallows darkness. Okay? I mean, if you walk into a dark room and you flick the light on, what happens to the darkness? Goodbye! Right? I mean, it's just eradicated. It's gone. So the hell dimension is staying way on their side of the rainbow, because the minute they get too close to the light dimension, it ceases to exist. Now, we are beings of light, human beings. We come from the light dimension. We come from the love source. We come from the God source. Yes, once in a while, you do get a human being in a body that's wandering around. They generally don't live very long. And that dark, that red dimension, that dark dimension, wants to spit out a soul or two, or spit out somebody that's influenced from that dark place. They don't last very long on earth. Why don't they? Because this is a dimension of light. And I know that people don't believe that. They're like, no, this can't be a light dimension. So many horrible things happen here. There are so many evil things that happen on the earth. And there are. Yet those are human beings enacting evil behaviors. Gang, we don't even really... We can't even get close enough to actual morbid evil. Our grossest idea of the most depraved thing we can possibly wrap our brains around, gang, doesn't even begin to touch the creepylicious garbage that's going on in that red dimension, in that hell dimension. Okay, so just understand that. I'm not making excuses for it. I'm just saying that's how bad it is over there. So if we are the beings who are of light, and we die and we get out of our body and we're just a little light, think of a sparkler, right? Or a campfire. When that little beautiful spark goes up into the heavens in a campfire, we stay glowing even when we're out of the body. So if we are a being of light, we can't exactly get sucked all the way across the rainbow into the hell dimension if the hell dimension can't touch the light dimension because it will be absorbed. Are you following? So what happens is that sometimes people, when they die, don't want to go to the light. They may think that they are a bad person. They may believe that they are going to go to hell. You got these angels trying to get people to go with them and they won't go. Either that or people have worked very hard to align themselves with darkness. And do we have that choice here on earth? Well, hell yes, we can. We can do whatever. We can walk outside and cover ourselves in horse manure and go to the market if we feel like it. I mean, we can do whatever we want, good or bad here. So if, say, this individual has aligned themselves with darkness and they die and they come out of their body and they are consciously aware that these angels are coming for them, but for whatever reason, maybe they're mad at God or whatever. It's got to be more than mad at God, because we tend to die and all of our human weirdness tends to stay with the body. The spirit knows where it's going, like a salmon just swimming up that river to spawn, even though it's fresh water and its scales are coming off. It's like, I don't even care. I got to get where I'm going. Our spirit knows where it came from and it wants to return there. So this is why I'm telling you to not go to heaven, to not go to that light source. You have got to work so hard to be separated. So hard. You've got to work so hard. So what I would tell you is that, is there a hell? Well, there is a dark dimension. Do humans go to hell? Not exactly. What happens is all these dark, creepy, crawly critters come out, and here's this little glowy thing floating around the ethers at this point, who's made a very conscious decision it's not going to the light. And the light keeps chasing it, and it's like, no, I don't want that. Well, if the dark things can keep that person, the dark beings can keep that person occupied for long enough, that person's free will is going to convince it that it's at its destination. And there really is no, in the Christian Bible, there might be reference to a purgatory in other religions. There isn't actually one in the Christian Bible. Now, the Catholic religion believes in a purgatory. They believe that we die and we're still so imperfect that people on earth need to pray to get us out of purgatory. And I know many people of the Catholic faith that really, they truly believe this, and they are very diligent in praying for the people in purgatory because they want them to go on to heaven. And so it's not been my experience that there's a purgatory. And it's not been my experience that people get stuck when they die. However, it's been my experience once in a while that somebody comes out of the body, has a million issues with going to heaven, so to speak, sticks around, dark things come around, and then they create this, if you're a Star Trek fan, they create this holodeck around that individual. And that person is then convinced that they are in hell. Now, they're not in heaven, and they're not quite crossed over to hell, but they're out of their body. So they're in this free-range quantum zone where anything can kind of take a crack at them, honestly. And really, I've heard people say, well, if that's true, if it's an all-loving God, how come God doesn't just suck them through the vacuum cleaner of love up to heaven? Well, generally speaking, it's because the person doesn't want to go for a number of reasons and is consciously denying that experience. And I know that sounds like an asinine thing. Who's going to deny going to heaven? I've seen it happen, though. And I've seen it happen a lot by those abusers we were talking about, those people who were broken as young children, who abused other children. They know something's off with them. They know something's wrong. And they're so terrified they're going to spend the rest of their existence as a spirit in hell that they don't want to cross over. And then they're just tormented by these dark things. And why would a dark thing be attracted to a light thing if the light thing could obliterate the dark thing? Well, here's the deal. Why are human beings attracted to nuclear power when it can melt our face off? Why are we attracted to it? Because it's so powerful. We can't help ourselves. We get these irradiated rods and, man, we can't even be around them because they'll melt our faces off. But they create so much power, and we can use that power for so many different things that we just kind of roll the dice and take a gamble that we'll be able to coexist with the nuclear rod and it will create power for us. This is why, seriously, this is why dark beings gravitate towards light beings. the power of light, if we were to look at how much, like the particle density of light, it takes many, 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 many dark particles to contain as much radiance or power or energy as one light particle. It's a physics thing. So these dark beings can't exactly take that soul, human soul, and take it to their hell, because that one light being would obliterate and cave in that entire dimension. But what they can do is create a hologram hell around somebody while that person is suffering. Then those dark beings eat the suffering. Because as I've said a million times on this podcast, demons, they're not out to grudge bang God through messing with the humans. I mean, that's the story in the Christian Bible. That's not really what's happening. Like, God loves all of its creation. God even has a soft spot, I think, for its dark stuff, but it's kind of given up on it because it's doing what it's doing. And that's not true. I don't think God has given up on the dark. I think God knows that the dark has its job it's doing. And it's dealing with certain energies, and it's recycling certain energies in that crappy hell dimension. And I'm not trying to sell you sympathy for the devil. There is evil and there is darkness, and I don't feel sorry for it. It is what it is. It's fine with being what it is. All I'm simply saying is that we can't actually go to that dimension or we'll cave it in. So when people want bad people to suffer, bad people have suffered their whole life, gang. And I'm going to use our former President Trump, for an example. There's a lot of people that love him. There's a lot of people that don't love him. When I look inside of that person, I see a very tormented human being, who's just terrified of people finding out that he's not what he sold himself as. And every day is a semblance of underlying anxiety and terror, which is why he's gained so much weight when he was in the White House. He probably put on 75, 100 pounds. He gained so much weight in the White House because that's a lot of fear. And plus he was eating McDonald's every day. So that person that everybody perceives as, oh, what a blowhard, what a bloke. He's, look at all the mean things he's saying, blah, blah, blah. He doesn't look like somebody who's in hell, but that's why he acts like that. Okay. Happy people don't act like that, if you think about it. So I would just tell you that, people don't go to hell. We live hell. We create hell on earth. And when we die, if we really, 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 really don't want to cross into the light and we make a big stink about it, there will be dark things that will trap us in a hell dimension until we can figure out we're trapped there and until we don't want to be there anymore and we can get out of there. But by that time, we're so twisted sideways, things get weird. And then people like me get called in to take this ghost out of a house that thinks it's literally in a hell dimension, that thinks that it's tormenting of human beings is what it has to do to keep the demons off of its back. And the demons are just laughing because it's eating its pain and it's eating the people's pain in the house. We're all freaking out because that's what darkness does. It eats pain out of the ethers. It just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, I recognize that this may be a very disturbing revelation for people that want to see people suffer for all eternity. Well, let me ask you this. If you are someone that wants to see someone suffer for all eternity, you might want to ask yourself what wound in you is bringing this forward. And I'm not condemning anybody with a wound that big, believe me. I'm just saying that wound in a person that would make them want another person to suffer for all eternity because of some god-awful thing they did in this lifetime on this chaos-driven planet where human beings can be broken at such a young age, and they want that broken person to suffer for all eternity? Wow, man! That's a lot of pain in somebody. If we want somebody to suffer for all eternity because of what they've done, I hope to goodness that I am not held responsible for all eternity for mistakes and god-awful things that I would have done in 100 or 95 or 75 or 80 years of life on a crazy free will planet. Because, excuse me, but what a shit deal that is. Come on. We come in here, let's just say we get born to insane parents. Let's say we're born into a cult. Let's say we truly believe that killing innocent people is the only way to get to heaven because that's what we're taught. And then we get to the other side and it was all a big joke and we're a bad person and we're punished eternally? That is psychotic. Look, there are people on this planet who do such horrific things that makes my blood boil, gang. I'm no saint. I am quite far from a saint. I have plenty of opinions. And then while I'm having all my opinions and I'm freaked out and angry and disgusted and grossed out, I can't help but look inside of these folks and I see how they turned into the monster that they turned into. And I'm watching this great show with my family on Netflix right now. It's called The Irregulars. I highly recommend it. It's really good. The casting is excellent. It's a modern day casting for kind of a 1800s London sort of show that spins off of Sherlock Holmes. So it's really quite brilliant so far. And one of the things that I've noticed in this show is that they're addressing paranormal weirdness. They're addressing dimensions that open up. And one of the characters on The Irregulars just the other night had a wonderful quote that I want to share with you. And the quote was, "Monsters make monsters." So I personally do not want anyone to suffer for all eternity because somehow that monster was made by a monster. That person, I just don't want them. I don't want them to suffer. I don't. Now, that doesn't mean that the Italian side of me might not want to push him in the mud and give him a good how-to. However, I don't want anyone to suffer for all eternity. There are times when I would like to see someone get their comeuppance in this life, for sure. Absolutely. I want to see accountability and justice and all of those things. But having someone suffer for all eternity because they screwed up in 70 or 80 or 60 years and did something heinous, and that damns you for all eternity, the physics of that from a spiritual perspective just don't make any sense at all. And believe me, I have had clients, gang, who have done some hideous things in their life. I have had clients call me when they have a short amount of time from a prison to talk about, am I going to go to hell? What's going on with me? I have visited with people who have done appalling things. And I can see this trapped little being inside of them just drowning in fear. And I think some of the worst sociopaths are people who do heinous things for money, honestly, and people who have no conscience because of that. And I think there is some big hell lessons that come with being a horrible person who withholds resources from people. They don't have to all be little kid rapers. I mean, there can be some pretty terrible people that do terrible things financially to others and allow the earth to be tanked for finances. And I do think that before those folks die, I have witnessed with these folks, I have witnessed that they are looking at their life. I don't know, let me back up. I had a client one time, and God rest his soul, who is in heaven, by the way, who crossed over and let me know he made it. So that was cool. And in life, he called himself a terrible person. And by all traditional definitions, he kind of was. He was an oil magnate. He was a person that did terrible things to his wife, to his daughters. He was a person that did horrific things with his money. He polluted oceans with his oil rigs. He did terrible things and knew it and didn't care because he was making billions of dollars. And as this man was ready to die, all of a sudden, the illness of avarice, and avarice is a type of mental illness, gang. When you have to have more and more and more, we see it more readily in people who have hoarding disorders, okay? Yet avarice becomes a mental issue. It becomes a mental illness. And when I look into the heads of people who suffer with avarice, their brains look like Swiss cheese. They do. They just look like they have big holes in them. And I'm not speaking figuratively. I am speaking literally. Something's not right in the brain for people who just want and want and want and want. Something's going on there. So I'm not a diagnostician. I am certainly no psychotherapist. Yet from my perspective, I would say that this avarice is an illness. And so this man had suffered with this avarice. His father had the avarice. And we had a president who had the avarice last term. And so as I spoke with this man, he began to have this sentience through the avarice. The closer to the end, he had cancer. And the closer he got to the end of his life, all of a sudden he began to see things differently. He began to see the planet as a living being. He began to see his grandchildren, who his daughters wouldn't even let talk to him because he was so terrible to the daughters. He began to see them as these beautiful little beings. He began to see how much he hurt his wife and his daughters. All this began to play out, and he just couldn't stop crying. And when he talked to me, he wanted to know what hell was going to be like, because for the first time in his life, and he was an older man, he realized that he had a shot at going to hell in his mind, okay? And he said he deserved to go to hell. And he said that he never before realized how much pain. He knew he was causing people pain. But again, I want you to think of the person who's having a psychotic breakdown, okay? And they're having a schizophrenic break, and they think that the bush in front of them is a demon, and they've got a baseball bat, and they're destroying the bush. They're beating the heck out of the bush. There's leaves flying everywhere. But in that person's mind, it's a demon, okay? So here's this guy with this huge sense of regret, who for the first time realized that he'd been beating a demon with the baseball bat, but it was a bush, except he realized it was his family. And the reason he had this perspective, and the reason he was full of so much remorse and so much fear, and he was drowning in it. There's a lot of people would say, good, he deserves it. But it was awful to feel this much pain in someone, gang. It was sickening. It was sickening. And the reason he could see what he did, his misdeeds were brought to him, is because he was starting to leave his body. His spirit was starting to float outside of himself, and he was starting to take a look at his whole life and realized, holy crap-a-roni, I completely was a monster, and my father was a monster. He went to a prep school. He was sent off. He was never hugged. I mean, it was the Scrooge story times 10, this guy, okay? So he became this monster, and he didn't realize it because his brain was so oppressed and his spirit was so oppressed, and there was mental illness in his family, that as soon as the spirit got out of that broken body, his spirit could see what he did to people. And so here was this man just in tears going, you need to let me know what hell is like, because that's what I've earned. I'm a terrible person, and I'm going to hell. And there's not anything I can do to get out of where I'm going. And I got this guy, and I'm trying to explain to him, listen, this is what I see. These are the holes in your brain. This is the avarice disease. This is what I'm looking at. And he would just cry and cry and cry. And it was devastating to be on the other end of the phone with this guy, because I could feel it in my solar plexus. That just retching regret. Like, that kind of regret where you can never, ever take something back, and you really recognize how badly you hurt somebody. And I got this guy's angel standing there, and this guy's angel is explaining to me, to explain to him, that he literally is in hell right now. And that he had been in hell his whole life because he never even knew what love was. He realized that he married his wife, but he subjugated her. He loved her in a way, but he never appreciated her. All these things that he could see, and she died, of some kind of cancer years before him. And he recognized, he kept calling himself a cold bastard. I'm such a cold bastard. I'm going to hell. But it wasn't like some, oh, poor me thing. Like, he was struck with this for the first time in his life at 80-something, taking his last breaths, getting ready to die. So I'm trying to explain to him that right now he is in hell. And I said to him, well, if you could go back and redo that all, could you? And the guy could barely talk. He's just sobbing, saying, yes, 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 but I can't. and I need you to tell me what hell looks like. I said, sir, hell looks like right now. Right now, you are in hell. This drowning realization that you hurt people, you will never be able to undo that. That you will be remembered for being the cold bastard. That is hell. You're there. You're there. And I asked him, I said, what would you tell your wife if you could tell your wife something? And he went on, he could barely talk. The poor guy could barely breathe. He's on, oxygen and having to take whiffs off of this mask. And I mean, it was pretty brutal. And he was telling his wife all these things that he would tell her and his daughters, and he wished he could reach out, but that never did get resolved. His daughters were like, screw you, you're a psycho. However, when he died, I told him, I said, so-and-so, when you die, you make sure and you come back and tell me you made it to the other side. Because he said, there's no way. There's no way. He says, when those angels show up for me, I'm not going. I don't deserve it. And I said, sir, we don't get to the next plane of existence because we deserve it. We go to the next plane of existence because our body wears out and our energy has got to go somewhere, and it goes back to the source. And what you can do on that source is you can learn to love. And next time you come back in, you be the most amazing person possible. Because you'll end up, your butt's going to end up back here again, dude. You're going to come back like a super ball off of a concrete mountain. I mean, you're going to bounce right back here. And he's like, no, I'm not going to accept it, blah. I said, okay, well then, you get what you get, man, but blah. So he did come by. He did come by about 2 weeks after he died, and he was young, and he was with his wife, and he wanted to tell me that he wanted to thank me because he might have let himself get drugged to hell. And he saw his father there in heaven, this terrible father who did terrible things to this guy. Oh my God. Horrible things. And he saw his dad up in heaven, and they all talked. They all talked about how they've been broken and twisted sideways and what they were going to bring into the next life and how they can be better people next time and how they were never going to let this happen again and how they were going to try to work through, the evils that they had put into play. And this guy, like I said, he was an oil dude, he was going to try to work through the people who are working with his company to do the right thing. Now, this is what's weird. I'm not going to say which company this is. However, the company, about 3 years later, started coming out with these clean up the environment things and big movements toward cleaning up the environment and giving scholarships back to impoverished people in areas where the oil wells had displaced people. And I couldn't help but wonder if this guy had gotten to some of his CEOs somehow on the other side and said, look, man, I'm going to rag you in your sleep until you actually begin to understand that we can make a difference in this life. And I tried to get this guy on the horn a couple of times to ask him if he actually was able to get a hold of his CEOs, and he hasn't returned my calls. I think he's on doing other things, or he might have just turned right around and came in another body. And it wouldn't surprise me if he was on this earth at this time as a Gen Z working for climate awareness and working against the types of sociopathic consumerism that consume the earth. So, that's just one story of somebody who was so remorseful that, for all intents and purposes, probably should have gone straight, on a sled to hell with the devil. And he didn't. He didn't. So, instead, he went on to probably help people out through his company spiritually on the other side once he got clear of the mental illness of avarice, Now, gang, I am not trying to say we shouldn't hold people to account here on earth. And I know many of you are going to be listening to this going, that is bullshit. Like, why am I working to be such a good person when I can just be this terrible person and still get to heaven? Well, heaven isn't the big reward, gang. Your spiritual growth is the big reward. You becoming amazing and you making this earth into even a more high vibration place so that those beings, those demons, those icky creepy crawlies from the red dimension, from the hell dimension, from that chaos, that chaotic dark dimension, can't get a foothold here on earth. Guess how we make earth a paradise? We raise its vibration by stopping being so terrible. And we may never be able to do that entirely until we stop wishing eternal damnation on the monsters who were made by monsters, because then we become the monster. And then we just make more monsters. We have to break this cycle of condemnation. Is there a moment where our life flashes before our eyes and we've got to account for things in our soul, our mind? Yeah, we account because we're leaving behind all the ills that we left behind. We're facing terrible things we did as we leave our body. We are literally taking an Excel spreadsheet of everything that we did in our life and taking a look at it by the time we die. And we're doing that so we can square up with ourselves before we go to this next cycle of our life and decide how the heck we're going to use these awarenesses in the afterlife, where you become a superhero. You can go to any parts all beyond. You can be anything you want to be. You can affect the earth in certain ways within reason. There's some rules there, but that's another podcast. We can deal with people that we wronged. We can bring them peace. We can bring them love from the other side, even though they don't know it comes from us. But we can push these things through the veil and try to do good deeds for the right reasons. Is there a hell? Yes. Do people generally go there? No. We would implode the hell. Do dark things come out and chase people around who absolutely refuse to go into the light for a number of reasons, which is very, very rare, but once in a while happens? Yeah, it happens once in a while. Is somebody going to get eternal damnation for 60 or 70 or 80 years on the chaos planet of doing some pretty dreadful things? Probably not. And if that makes you furious, I would implore you to sit down with that part of you that wants to punish for all eternity and ask it why it's so angry, what hurt it so much that it could never release and forgive. And I'll tell you, if we truly become the monsters that truly want somebody to roast in hell for all eternity, but we really want that to happen, we start to twist up inside of ourselves. We start to become something that we're not going to recognize in the mirror in 50 years. Trust me. I'm not saying you can't be mad at people. I'm not saying you shouldn't want to see people brought to justice. There's a lot of people that I want to see some good Old Testament justice come down on, quite frankly. But I'm not God, and I didn't create the dynamics of this universe, and I am never going to carry in myself the kind of hatred that wishes somebody to roast in hell for all eternity, because I do not believe that I want to experience that life lesson of becoming a monster. I just don't want it. I'd rather cry it out. I'd rather cry and cry and cry and ask all of creation why something that hideous had to happen to me, why I was so invisible, why I didn't matter, why that happened to me. And then I would wait to see what the universe had to say. And maybe I would, by releasing that monster that wants to see people roast for all eternity, maybe I would make some room for more light to come into me. And then maybe I get to heal. And that healing is what we call forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, and it's not condoning, and it's not letting somebody off the hook. It's releasing the monster inside of you. Because all it's going to do is take up more real estate. It'll take up more real estate in you. You know, different religions have different ways of looking at hell, chaos, bad deeds. And I'm not suggesting you should go just be a haphazard nightmare, because you'll just end up in heaven anyway. Believe me, a lot of weird things happen when we have so much regret because we've done nothing but be a creep in life. And it does make it pretty confusing when we're crossing out of our body, and we could get hijacked by weirdos from a dark dimension that just want to eat our suffering. So I don't recommend that. You know, we all make mistakes, but none of our mistakes are so horrible that they separate us from that parent creation, from that particle of light. We have to separate ourselves. And when we have remorse, and when we do grow, and when we recognize what we did was so hideous, we change the quantum fabric. And we give people we've never even met the courage to forgive themselves for terrible things. And most people never forgive themselves for doing terrible things because it's too terrible. So I hope you understand the difference in this podcast of the get out of jail free card. Who cares if you rape 19 kids? So what? You're going to go to heaven anyway. And the amount of hell that we put ourselves through regular basis, and the spiritual physics of why light beings do not go to a chaotic dimension, that they would implode. I'm hoping you're understanding the differences in all of these. And I hope with this podcast that if you are somebody who is working to bring people who do terrible things to account, understand that by bringing them to account, you help them in their life journey also. I'm not talking about Old Testament justice. I'm not talking about vigilanteism here. I'm not saying some of my Italian throwback genome doesn't go there in my head sometimes. What I'm talking about is if you are someone who works for the advocacy of those without a voice, and you are someone who works with helping those babies heal from abuse, you're somebody who works to get perpetrators or abusers into a situation where they can no longer harm others, and they can be able to start to see the brokenness and the monster in them that ate them. And if they can even make an account of that before they leave this planet, they will help heal the quantum field. They can't ever probably change the damage they did to the soul of another person on their way out. Yet believe me, these angels are working overtime with people who have endured terrible abuse. And some of this is above my pay grade, gang, about why we encounter abuse and why these things happen. I really don't have all the whys, so I'm not going to pretend to. Again, I'm not a prophet of God, thank you. However, I will tell you that if we can relieve ourselves from carrying around that inner monster, then we will stop making hell on earth. And if we stop making hell on earth, Earth's vibration goes up, people's consciousness goes up, all our little Gen Zs are excited to be on the planet again because they see people being sweet and kind to one another. You know what I love talking to the Gen Zs and Gen Ys and some of the millennials. I love it because they just want to be kind. They just want the world to be a good place. They want to love. And sure, some of them have been made into monsters by monsters, but does that mean I'm going to hate them? No, because then I'm a monster. Why would I hate somebody for being so crunched into themselves that they become a monster? I mean, that makes no sense. And I don't want to live in a hell. I want to bring heaven to the earth. I want to bring perfection to the earth. We're probably never going to be perfect, but I want to bring love and kindness to this earth. And there are things that I've done in my life, mistakes I've made growing up, just thoughtless things I've done as a kid that I didn't realize were so harmful to other people in my own journey of self-discovery. That, I can't go back in time and make up for it. All I can do is be a better person now than who I was. And if that person ever pulled me aside and said, listen, you SOB, this is what you did to me, and this is how it affected me. And I mean, I'm just saying, if there's anybody out there that I've hurt this badly, I would own it. I'd have to own it. What would I do? All I could do is sob at that person's feet and saying, God, you're right. I'm so sorry. In my brokenness, I hurt you. And, there's not a thing I can do to make that better except to say I would never do that again. And I'm hoping I never hurt anybody that badly in my life, my God. But if it happened, that's where I'd have to go with it. Because that's all we can do is grow and be better people. And I hope you're not somebody who's so hard on yourself that when you leave your body, you believe that you should be trapped in darkness for your whole life. Gang, we don't have any idea what actual separation from light actually feels like, because even in our worst hellish moments, we're still attached to this dimension, which was made by light. Okay? So I just, somewhere in your psyche, stick that in there. Okay? And go please this week. And I know this is kind of a heavy podcast, so sorry about that. But go this week and just really work on your inner monster. We all have one. And it's different from our inner shadow side. Our inner shadow side, we talked about that in another podcast. That's different. The inner monster wants to rage and hurt people no matter what, and wants them to hurt. I think as people, we just want to see people get their comeuppance. Why do you think in movies, when the bad guy, we catch the bad guy, then the good guys in movies fix what the bad guy did wrong. We want to see things fixed. There's a difference between wanting to see somebody suffer, maybe suffer a little teeny bit, just until they realize what they did was bad, right? But then to want them to keep suffering, that means we are suffering. That means there's a part of us that suffers and suffers and suffers, and it needs company. So please free yourself. If you're somebody who feels that way, that somebody else needs to suffer for all eternity, please free yourself from suffering that much, that it needs company in your suffering from all eternity. That's free yourself from the monster that's keeping you there. Human beings are meant to learn. We're meant to have repercussions. We are meant to be accountable. But are we going to go to hell? Well, we're going to go to hell adjacent if we try real hard. But mostly, we're going to go to heal. Because that's what happens when we come out of our body. We heal. And we become part of the solution. So let yourself heal and work for accountability in actions that have been taken against you or others that have wronged you or others. Work for accountability and hope that lessons can be learned. Because it is through compassion that we save this world, gang. Not allowance, not adherence, not forgiveness in its surface form, but through compassion first for ourselves and then for the monsters that live in others. I know. Wouldn't it be nice if people just got disqualified? Disqualified, heading to hell. I'm heading. I'm going to heaven. This place can be heaven if we make it heaven. So you go make your corner of the world heaven, okay? Go make heaven this week. Go work for accountability and growth. And release that need to hate. You're not helping anybody. You're just hurting yourself, honestly. And you're keeping yourself in hell. Nobody wants that. Go be and heal instead, okay? I love you all, and I will see you next podcast.